If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of 3. Join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth and postnatal recovery, helping you have a wonderful pregnancy and afterbirth experience. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Well, hello there. Welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. This topic today is all about secondary infertility. I am chatting to Robyn Birkin, who is a life coach for infertility, and she's podcast host of the Fertility Warriors. So initially we were going to chat about two topics, secondary infertility and pregnancy after loss. They are both such important topics to discuss, and I'm really grateful chatting to Robyn today. But what I ended up doing was splitting this episode into a 2-part series because it was getting long and I just did not want to cut Robyn off because it is all really important stuff and it's really valuable. I trust today in next week's episode you will find really valuable. So today's episode is on secondary infertility, and Robyn describes what it is, the emotional challenges that can occur, and also some really practical steps for helping to deal with this huge event in our life. Then next week's episode is all about pregnancy after loss. So do stay tuned, as I said. And I just want to say that I'm not pregnant, but Robyn, being the life coach she is, had some amazing tips which can be translated into so many different facets of life. So relationship, fertility, business, life. So both these episodes, super valuable, and I trust you are going to find them really helpful. But before we do dive into today's episode, I do invite you to come and join us inside Fitness Mama. So if you've found you're not exercising as much as you'd like to during pregnancy and post-pregnancy, perhaps you're busy or you've lost the motivation to exercise, or you're not sure how to best be looking after your body, or you've got pelvic girdle pain and abdominal muscle separation and you're not sure about the best exercises for you, or you'd like to get back into running after birth and you want the best Kickstarter possible, then Fitness Mama is for you. Join us for these convenient, short, easy workouts that you can do from home, whether or not your baby's asleep or your toddler's running around or it's at the end of a long day at work. So just head to fitnessmama.com and the link is in the show notes. All right, let's get into this episode. So Robyn, thank you so much for joining me on the Fitness Mama podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love being able to talk about these topics because they're things that we don't talk about enough. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to chat about all these things.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, let's get started with just, like I've introduced you a little bit in the intro, but why do you do what you do? Like what drove you to this area of life coaching?
So exactly 10 years ago this year, my husband and I started trying to conceive. I proudly fly the flag of being a type A, head down, bum up, was a corporate marketing manager, was used to work hard, play hard, put in the long hours. I could succeed at anything I wanted in life if I worked really hard at it. Convinced that we would conceive straight away as soon as we started trying. And needless to say, that was not the case. And what started off as a little bit disappointed turned into somewhat dismayed, turned into absolute despair. And 2 years after we had first started trying to conceive, we'd been at a fertility clinic, we'd just done our first IVF cycle, and we'd been through multiple IVF cycles other fertility treatments before. This one had worked and we were pregnant, and it was amazing and awesome, even though I was still recovering from a moderate case of something called hyperstimulation, where your ovaries they give you a little bit of meds and your ovaries go gangbusters. I was a slight 54 kilograms and had an additional 7 kilograms of fluid in my abdomen. So my stomach was right up in my lungs. I couldn't stand up properly because my stomach was so distended so quickly. But we were pregnant until we were told that the pregnancy wasn't viable. And it was I had been almost kidding myself that I was coping with infertility up until that point. I had been continuing with this low-level anxiety, feeling like if I just keep my head down, bum up, if I just work harder, if I just hang on for this tiny bit longer, surely just one more cycle or one more month and then it's all going to be over, and magically any of this anxiety that I was feeling is going to melt away. And then the pregnancy wasn't viable and we had a medical miscarriage, and I call it the breakdown before the breakthrough, because that was the point. It was almost like I needed to hit that rock bottom point when I was like, well, actually, I'm not coping with this at all. And I need to do a better job. I can't martyr myself in the pursuit of having a baby forever. And this may not happen for a really long time. And I actually literally couldn't fathom doing another fertility treatment cycle, whatever, at that point, because I completely crumbled emotionally. What happened after that was a relatively quick process. It was about 2 to 3 months of completely shifting the fundamental way that I was going about my journey. And it helped that, random fact, I used to be a vegan food blogger and was published in 2 cookbooks, but at that time had these other friends who were like wellness friends. And we did this charity project. We did a cookbook to raise money for domestic violence victims. It just so happened, though, that they were also life coaches, mind detox therapists, a clinical psychologist, a brain care specialist, all of these people who actually kind of had the abilities and tools that could give me little bits of what I needed, as well as, myself reading and trying new things that I managed to put myself together. I had another failed cycle after that, and it was like night and day. It was this process of being like, why have I been struggling so much emotionally on my own? Why did I not know what I knew before? And this completely changed the game for me, because even though that cycle failed, even though I'd been through the ringer and this was yet another failed cycle, I could cope. And I felt like I had the energy to continue going. I felt like I had the clarity to keep going. And it changed my life. It honestly has now completely changed the trajectory of my life. But it was such a profound change. And I think a lot of us have that zero to hero moment. And then someone said to me randomly one day, some of your listeners may know Lisa Corduff, who said to me one day, you should start a podcast. And then just as if it was such an easy thing, I went, okay. And this was before anyone listened to podcasts or did any of that. She just said to me, you should start a podcast. I went, okay, I started one. And then I blinked and we're at near 1 million downloads. I've now trained as a life coach and mind-body practitioner. There's in some ways I feel like I've fallen into doing this, but I feel so powerfully that what I learned was life-changing. And obviously now I know even more. It completely changed the way that I was going on my journey. And still to this day, there's something like 76% of women who are struggling to conceive or going through fertility treatments show significant symptoms of anxiety, and around 39% meet the criteria for major depressive disorder. Shit.
Yeah.
So here I am feeling like this is a really important thing, and we actually really need to unlearn a lot of what we were taught at school by our parents about what coping with emotional hardship should look like and how to actually cope through traumatic life experiences. So that's what I do. That's how I got here, which is this random story of kind of falling into it, but also having my own street cred of going through that hard experience.
Amazing. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing. So we are going to be talking today about two main topics, and I'm sure our conversation might go in any which direction, but we're going to be talking about secondary infertility and pregnancy after loss.
Yes.
So two really important topics that I think, as you said, we just don't discuss enough, but affect a lot of women. So amazing. Let's get into it. Secondary infertility. Let's just all get on the same page. What is it?
So secondary infertility is essentially women who are navigating infertility but actually have one child already. So there may be some people coming through who had infertility with their first child, but by and large, a lot of people who really struggle with secondary infertility are those mamas who got pregnant fairly easily the first time around, and then second time around, something's going on and it's just not happening for them. So that's, in a nutshell, secondary infertility means we have a child already, but when we're trying for our second, third, fourth, whatever child, we're navigating infertility.
Yeah, amazing. So when I was about to jump on this call with you, I touched base with an obstetrician contact friend of mine, and I've said, she's a fertility specialist, so we are going to be stay tuned, ladies, because we are going to have a doctor on the podcast to give more the medical side of things with secondary infertility. But can you name some of the causes of secondary infertility?
Yeah. So there can be a big range of infertility, causes of secondary infertility, and some of it could have been things that were going on for us even when we had our first pregnancy, but by chance we got pregnant. But when we have our first baby, a lot can change in our health, and a lot of us are dealing with things like postnatal depletion. And I always say, so coming to this from, I guess, a bit of a life coach perspective, it takes energy to create a baby. Physical energy, emotional energy, all sorts of energy. And we can look at things just from a physical point of view, but the reality is that when we're existing in chronic stress, so not everyday stress like, you're stuck at the lights or your car breaks down, like chronic stress where day after day after day we're experiencing stress, we're stuck in fight or flight mode, that impacts our hormones as well. It's not different systems in our body. Our nervous system, our hormones are all very interconnected, and particularly our sex hormones. So when we have our first child, quite often we are depleted. We can end up, especially when we're not getting a lot of sleep, with like melatonin, cortisol dysfunction. They go wacky. They're the opposite. Sleep is important for so much of our fertility. Also, so much of even things like our diet and what we eat. So when we are significantly lacking in sleep, we crave higher salt, higher carb foods. That might mean, though, that we're depriving our bodies of essential mitochondria to create healthy eggs. So mitochondria is like the battery cells of our body, and an egg has a ridiculous amount of mitochondria in it, especially in comparison to a sperm. Basically, fun fact is that I'm pretty sure a woman's egg, once it gets together with the sperm, kind of ditches the man's mitochondria. But you need a ridiculous amount of energy, emotional and physical, to create a baby, even if we look at it from the perspective of mitochondria, right? We can start after having another baby getting thyroid issues. We can start developing autoimmune issues, all sorts of different reasons, but also it could have been underlying causes like endometriosis or PCOS that we could have had before that we weren't diagnosed with first time around, and we lucked out, got pregnant.
Right. Just a few things to name.
Just a couple.
To name a few. Yeah. Okay. So let's say a woman has had a baby and she's discovered she's having trouble falling pregnant again. What are some of the common emotional challenges you see arise?
So there's a few different quirks with secondary infertility. The very first one that we have is almost this feeling of, I already have another baby. Why can't I just be grateful for what I've got? Because all of a sudden they're entered into this world of infertility, and there's all of these women who are like, I would just pray to have one baby, which is completely valid. So then there's this guilt, this shame on ourselves And I liken it to sometimes if you've broken an arm, right, you would not say to yourself, let me just twist it a little and like make it a little bit worse. But we do that to ourselves all the time. We feel really crappy inside because we really want to grow our family. We had this picture of how our lives would go. Maybe we envisaged this perfect, 2 adults, 2 kids, or 2 adults, 3 kids kind of family. And then all of a sudden, the dream or the thing that we'd had in our heads that we thought we'd grow up with and that it would happen has shifted on us. Our whole world has shifted. But also, when we're dealing with primary infertility, it's really easy for us to say, turn up the self-care, like just turn on that tap of self-care, take time for yourself, rest, sleep in, go get a massage, acupuncture, whatever it is. It's really hard to do that when you have secondary infertility.
Yeah.
Get some more sleep. How is that possible?
Yeah.
And then there's that guilt as well of going and sitting in a fertility clinic and having a 2-year-old like go crazy, jumping from the rafters, crying, wanting snacks, all of that, and really not having that opportunity to look after ourselves or even have the peace and quiet to process. And sometimes when you're dealing with secondary infertility, you want to have that mental breakdown or that little moment of falling apart, but you can't because there's a little human or other little humans. You have to park those emotions, and then we end up not having the ability to really circle back and address that. So it builds up and builds up inside us.
Wow, it's full on. And I perhaps haven't given it the, I have been lucky in my pregnancy journey, so I just feel so grateful that we can chat because it's huge. And so there's so many of us that know women going through this, even if we're not going through this ourselves, I'm sure we all know someone out there going through it. So would you say they're the biggest main challenges that women have emotionally?
Yeah, through secondary infertility. I mean, especially if you haven't had trouble conceiving the first time around, or what I see also is I had a lot of personal friends who this happened to as well, is they had trouble conceiving, they went to a fertility clinic, got pregnant on the first try. So same thing, they go to try for their second baby, they go straight back to the fertility clinic and expect it to be a bit like, okay, I know the process, I've got this down pat. It's almost like, when you have your second baby, well, this was my experience anyway, and I was like, I know sleepy signs now, I know naps, like, hello, I've got this down pat. And then all of a sudden it's this new set of things that you're like, oh, crap, this baby's really different. Or like my first baby would only sleep in the wrap. My second baby was like a cot sleeper. She would rather cry 50 minutes in the car the entire way home than fall asleep in the car. It's like this whole, so the way you expect that, I'm going back to the fertility clinic, this is how things are going to work. You have these expectations and all of a sudden, life happens. There's a phrase by Mike Tyson that says something like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's what I liken it to. You go through secondary infertility, you're like, I know how to track my ovulation. I know what to do. It's going to be 3 months of trying to conceive. I'm going to get pregnant, or I'm going to go back to the fertility clinic. I'm going to use my frozen embryos. It's all going to pan out. And then all of a sudden, it does not pan out. And it's this shock to the system and this whole entire process of reframing and shifting what you thought your life would be.
Okay, well, let's dive into that because I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I also know this is a huge question. This is probably everything that you cover. But if you could boil it down to 3, like if I want to ask what are 3 things that someone can do if they're going through this situation now.
Yeah.
And then after that, just before I forget, I want to also find out if you know someone going through this, what are a couple of things that you can do to help them? So
absolutely.
Let's start off with let's go.
Okay. So what I would say the very first thing to do is watch the way that you speak to yourself, right? So I'm going to give you a really good example that I use with everyone. It was about this day that I went out when I was dating, and I went out to dinner with my friend Jessica. I went out to dinner with a first date, someone that I'd met on Tinder, and we got into the restaurant, we sat down, got a drink, we ordered our meal, and then randomly out of the blue, this guy just looked at me and he said, I can't do this, and he walked out of the restaurant. The first thing I did was I sat there in the restaurant all by myself, and I called my friend Jessica. And I was like, this is my best friend at the time, and I said, Jessica, I don't know what to do. This is the experience that I've had. And the first thing that she said to me was, are you still using that old profile pic that you had? Well, mate, you look a bit different now and you've put on a few pounds, so maybe you weren't what he was expecting.
Oh.
Did you talk too much? Because sometimes you do that. Did you talk about your business all the time? But maybe that was why he left. And here's what I want to say. I completely made up that story. However, isn't that the way that we always talk to ourselves? Something happens, and the very first thing our brain defaults to is, where have I messed this up? What have I done wrong? It's me. Is it my profile picture? Did I do something wrong? Did I talk too much? Is it what I was wearing? Instead of looking at it the way that a true best friend would, right?
Yeah.
Because if I was my own best friend, or I had a best friend who was Jessica, who was also actually amazing, she would say something along the lines of, stay there, I'm coming there. You know what? Come to my house. Let's sort it together. They'd listen. They'd say, give yourself some grace. Maybe he just got out of a relationship. Maybe he was a cheating dirtbag. All of these other scenarios, rather than shaming and guilting me. And it's exactly what I say with, you don't break your arm and then go and twist it a little bit. So the very first thing is, let's not amplify the really hard time that we're going through, and let's give ourselves some grace and be our own best cheerleader. And a lot of that looks like parenting ourselves. If you had a little child and your little child was having a really hard time and crying, you would pour a bunch of love on that. So we need to pour a bunch of love on ourselves. So that's number one, is watch the way you speak to yourself.
Yeah, and I just love that. And I know these are two totally different topics, but what you said resonates with a lot of my mums inside Fitness Mama, where they join the program because they want to exercise during pregnancy, they want to recover really well, they want to feel strong. But then they're like, I'm finding it really hard. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I don't have time. And then there's this massive guilt trip as well, and that internal talk. I'm like, hey guys, this is a phase of motherhood you're in. And by talking through all those factors, we don't need to guilt ourselves. This is just the situation. And then so it really resonated what you just said, and it can be applied probably to so many different facets of life. This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
Yep. How can we be more cheerleader and less drill sergeant?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then the next thing that I would say is to notice every day the things that you're grateful for. This was the easiest and simplest and littlest thing that I started with that made one of the most profound differences to the way that I was coping. There's a lot of science behind why this works, but our brain has a natural negative bias. Your brain is always looking out for how you can minimize past pain and maximize future pleasure. i.e., your brain is designed to look at where did I mess up in the past and how can I avoid like drama in the future. So it's stuck on this whole this is why we end up completely worried about, these worst case scenarios that may never eventuate. But what we do when we just start this really simple gratitude practice is we start to shift that negative bias. So all you will do is every night before you go to bed, takes all of 2 minutes, write 3 things that you're grateful for, right? And don't pick the same things. Like, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for the, child I already have. I'm grateful for my house. Don't pick that. Pick tiny little things. Husband brought me a coffee this morning. I am grateful that there's no rain today. I'm grateful that my floor is vacuumed for the first time in 3 weeks, right? Tiny little stuff, and try to think of different things every day. What will happen is after about 2 or 3 weeks, instead of your brain always looking for what's not going right, all of a sudden you've got to write 3 different things in this journal tonight that you're grateful for. So you are going to be walking around your house everywhere and be like, what's going well? Like, what's working, right? And so we start to, turn down the volume on everything that feels like it's not working and turn up the volume on what is working. And it's a conscious way to rewire and shift the way that our brain is working. And it takes about 2 weeks. It takes like 2 minutes a day. It's one of the easiest things that we can do, even if we're sleep deprived, going through a really hard time, is to do that. And then the next thing that I would do is break it down into smaller steps, right? So often we look at everything with this big picture view. We're always looking at the finish line. And as humans, let's say you said to yourself, got a goal to run 5 kilometers. What happens when you achieve that goal and you can run 5 kilometers? You say, right, now I've got to run 7 kilometers.
The goalpost keeps changing.
Yeah, it's our human nature that we do this. We forget to pause for applause. But also, it's really hard to always be like only rewarding ourselves. And this is probably also going to apply to all of your members. It's really hard when everything is like that we choose to celebrate or not celebrate is based on a goal that is actually out of our control. What we have control over is the tiny little actions that we take. How can we break it down and look at just the next right step, just the next workout, just the next day, rather than always looking at the goal? Break it down into the actions, break it down into just the tiny little actions, right? All I need to do, whatever it is, do you know what? I'm going to celebrate if I can do just one workout.
Yeah.
I'm going to celebrate if I can do just 5 minutes of a workout or whatever it is. You know what? I'm going to celebrate if I make it through just this one appointment, regardless of what my kid does at the fertility clinic, if he's climbing the walls and jumping on the seats, okay, whatever. If all hell breaks loose, I'm going to celebrate as soon as I get out of that appointment, just breaking it down into tiny little steps and actions.
My heart is singing at the moment. I'm like, yes. On my Instagram, I think just a couple of days ago, I wrote small steps. And I'm obviously talking about it from a recovery perspective and pregnancy health, but just small steps. Motherhood is challenging. It's got sleep deprivation and we're busy. Just what's something you can do? 10 minutes of stretches in the sunshine to help you feel more alive, or 5 minutes of something while your toddler's climbing on top of you. What's something small that can help you feel better today, now?
Yeah.
So chunk it up, make it easy.
And pause for applause often. If you are constantly walking through your day, pat on the back, 5 minutes, pat on the back, you are going to feel so much better about life than if you sit there saying to yourself, whatever it is, I need to do 6 workouts today, or I need to get pregnant this month. It's make or break this month. If we can break it down into celebrating actions and not goals and celebrating often, life feels a lot better.
Do a little happy dance every time in the kitchen.
Totally.
Kids can join in.
Totally. Yeah. DJ Raffi on YouTube.
I don't know that.
Oh, if anyone has young children, you want DJ Raffi on YouTube in your life.
Oh my gosh, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Look, I am aware of time. That has all been amazing. Just quickly, as a friend, if you know someone going through this, what's one thing you can say or do to help?
This is the biggest piece of advice that I have for anyone who has anyone going through anything that is hard. Let's not give advice. Let's be validating. There is so much compassion and love that can come from just saying to someone, wow, that sounds really hard. Yeah. Just validate that what someone is going through is really big, and those are big emotions and big things that they're going through. Just doing that can be completely life-changing.
Love it. Right, so I'm cutting off the podcast interview there because next week we will dive into pregnancy after loss. So it's a 2-part series. This is the first one, and then do stick around next week. It's a really brilliant episode. So before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting the show notes for this episode together with all the links, including how to connect with Robyn at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at FitnessMama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.